McBling is a grainy song ringtone blaring out of your Motorola speaker. It's unwrapping your headphones from around your pink metallic iPod Nano. It's spraying your Viva La Juicy perfume around your chunky highlights. Y2k, meanwhile, landed a tad earlier on the fashion history timeline, teetering between the late 90s and the early 2000s, with the dominating trends of lower waistlines and relaxed glam. The era slowly morphed into something more defined. Think of McBling as Y2K's teched out, more splashy sister. The McBling aesthetic first appeared during a time of uncertainty and change, the declaration of the Iraq War, 9/11, and the millennium. During periods of uncertainty, people turned to comfort. Living excessively and nihilistically was the answer to many people's problems. Hot pink is the unofficial color associated with this era. Think of movies like Mean Girls, Cheetah Girls, or Josie and the Pussycats. McBling reflected the shiny early stages of the digital revolution and the interconnected world we live in now. The aesthetic was all about mixing glamour with ease, drawing attention with color and shine. McBling rose in popularity between 2003 and 2008. Artists like Missy Elliott, LL Cool J, and Eve are some of the few icons who brought aspects of the trend to life. Think tracksuits, matching sets, blinged out accessories, and colorful streetwear. Froyo Tam, an artist who has been researching the Y2K aesthetic through the Y2K Research Institute, defines McBling as a time of hedonism. The aesthetic revolves around excess and luxury. Due to the 20-year rule, McBling fashion was heavily inspired by 90s fashion, which consisted of denim, exposed thongs, sequins, logomania, tracksuits, camouflage, etc. Logomania was a trend in the early 90s where people wore clothes that were covered in designer logos. This trend was started by African-American fashion designer Dapper Dan when he started putting bootleg prints of designer logos all over streetwear, and his clientele just so happened to be the hip-hop community. As his pieces were worn by the likes of LL Cool J, Bobby Brown, and Mike Tyson, he became well known in the black community, and then eventually logomania was mainstream. Kimora Lee Simmons also had a huge impact on McBling with her creation of her clothing brand, Baby Phat, in 1999, as a branch of her then-husband, Russell Simon's clothing brand, Phat Farm. Kimora said that she created Baby Phat so women of color could have a place in the streetwear industry that tried so hard to exclude them. Black women in the music industry like Lil' Kim, Alicia Keys, Missy Elliott, and Aaliyah helped make the brand mainstream by wearing Baby Phat in the 2000s. Another McBling trend popularized by the black community was camouflage. In the 90s, camouflage print was a major part of black streetwear due to army surplus stores selling camouflage clothing for so cheap. The beauty supply store in particular was a place where black people could not only buy hair products but accessories and clothes as well. From big rings to blinged out necklaces, black Americans were able to take pieces from their local beauty supply stores and create fashion moments. Black women ruled style and fashion in the 90s. They also ruled the 2000s through the R&B and hip-hop scene, with the 90s video vixen showing the thin eyebrows, snatched bodies, low-rise jeans, bedazzled flair, belly button rings, and everything you'd see credited as Y2K. These women were overshadowed by mediocre and problematic white women when we look back for inspiration, and they're also overlooked when looking at the current fashion scene. The TikTok fashion community is one of the biggest offenders. Non-black people steal from black people and then hate on black people for participating in the trends that were stolen from them. Black women being erased and looked over during the discussion of Y2K is no coincidence or a one-time thing.
So even with this increase in maximalism, fun, and colorful outfits, as we moved further and further away from 2001, much of America, especially middle America, was still really grounded in their conservative and traditional fashion styles. So the more extreme ways of dressing that we associate with that time as like glamorous and cool and Y2K early 2000s fashion were actually heavily punished and criticized. So when we talk about racialization of these fashion styles, dressing in the Y2K or early 2000s fashion styles was very demonized. It was not without consequence to look black in the early 2000s at all. Racial distinctions at the time were much more significant and less ambiguous than they are now. Black American culture and media was very often limited to singular channels. There were like 2 to 3 comfortable channels for black people to see themselves represented on across a 100 channel TV guide at the time. So Black American culture was not just something that everybody was grateful to appreciate and understand as one of many parts that made up America. Instead, it was very heavily demonized, criticized. Every single rap video got tons of think pieces about how it was destroying American culture. Rappers were demonized for degrading women as if what they were doing was unique to Black American culture and not something that's also done in alternative music, country music, and all forms of music in the United States and globally. As if misogyny is exclusive to rap. Not to say that there aren't criticisms of misogyny in rap, but it's not exclusive to rap. Tight jeans, loose jeans, tight clothes, midriff showing. Every single thing Black people did was demonized. The fashion styles that we look at now on Pinterest and deem y2k or early 2000s fashion are really just hot girl and girl of color fashion. So Black girls looked like this, but this was not the dominating fashion style at all. This was a hot girl way of dressing, just like we have hot girl ways of dressing now. It would be like if somebody came from the future and looked back on what is called BBL fashion, which I have problems with too, but what we call BBL fashion, if they looked at that and said, well, that's how people looked and dressed in the 2020s, most of us don't know a lot of people who look like that. We may follow them on Instagram, we may have heard of them, we may see them as celebrities. That isn't necessarily a representation of most, many, or all of the 2020s ways of looking or existing or dressing, right? This is just something that is limited to hot girls, Black girls, and girls. And that has nothing to do with most of America, because most of America is not hot girls. Now, even when we look at the Paris Hilton y2k-ification of it all, they still weren't accessible to or worn by most Americans, even if they were visibly recognizable because of media like television and wrap-up shows on VH1. It didn't mean that most Americans looked like that. It was definitely an aspirational look for some people who were interested in popular culture and fashion and trends, but it didn't mean that most Americans actually looked like that, because these are like extreme examples of celebrities dressing, right? The emphasis in Black American culture and cultures that are marginalized in the United States, emphasis on clothing customization. When you don't have things, it makes it very easy to search for ways of fashioning identity that set you apart in ways that you can. All aspects of existing on the margins in a society involve, at some point, people or groups of people in different cultures trying to participate in mainstream Americanness as they set the agenda, facing and experiencing the consequences that when you do that, you'll always be told you're not good enough, you're not white enough, you're not rich enough, you're not American enough, and then deciding to cultivate and reinforce the importance of your own culture in the United States and creating new culture for yourself here that excludes that and rejects it and subverts it. And that's what informed a lot of Black American fashion trends in the early 2000s, and that's why they're exclusive to Black American culture and not early 2000s culture. We were doing things because we have different ways of navigating and existing, and when we tried to participate in white American and predominant American fashion trends, we were told it's not for us, you look a mess, you look crazy, this is not for you, you can never be white, you won't be white. So instead of trying to be the white thing, we create something for ourselves and have different codes and standards and expectations to meet up to in our culture. Codes and standards that Black people made and were expected to live up to as far as beauty, grooming, fashion styling, etc., are unique to Black American culture because they existed in direct response to an exclusion of whiteness and white hegemonic trends. So when white America is saying, look like the people on Friends, we're not watching Friends, we're watching what's happening on BET, UPN, etc., and reinforcing the importance of the codes intracommunally instead of trying to adopt things that we've been told are not for us. Which is why it's important to not identify things that was subversive and challenging and that Black people were punished for socially and culturally at the time by being placed on worst dressed lists, being deemed ghetto, having negative articles written about them, never giving credit for participating in high fashion, being dressed in custom high fashion designer garments, etc., etc. It's important to give credit to Black American culture and identify Black fashion trends as such rather than seeing them as Y2K or early 2000s fashion, because they are completely and intentionally limited to Black American culture, and the same is the case for cultures of color and other marginalized cultures in the United States.
Things like this always happen without fail to black women, and it shouldn't be a surprise. Despite everything, black women will keep pioneering everything and persevere because that's what they do. In the words of Shy Smith, "You can't get rid of me, I'm staying right here." At the turn of the new millennium, the American general public saw a shift. The culture moved towards a new era anticipating technological and cultural advances, creating a style which was often referred to ghetto fabulous. Black Americans were able to make an urban style that forwarded the fashion trends. Artists like Missy Elliott pushed visuals in both music and fashion. Her influences could be seen as her career progressed. In 2002, she released a music video for Work It. Missy took a traditionally male choice of clothing for comfort and made it sexy, feminine, and fun. Much of what black Americans wore at the time was DIY, due to major fashion brands not catering to them, so many took fashion and style into their own hands. For the girl group Destiny's Child, which was composed of 4 black women at the time, their style took elements from the glamour of the Motown era, but with a modern urban twist. Tina's designs were heavily criticized by the industry as low budget or ghetto, but all the while inspired trends worn by the group's white counterparts, Britney Spears, Christina Aguilera, and Jessica Simpson. Oftentimes, black creatives are criticized for their works, only for it to be accepted on non-black people years later. Tina's innovative style allowed for the members of Destiny's Child and the group to become a staple in pop culture and fashion. While mcbling is often misattributed as y2k, the truest form of y2k fashion is actually the technology-inspired wave of tight leather pants, metallic clothing, and silvery eyeshadow. This particular style featured utilitarian chic clothing, shiny materials, and techy accessories. The futuristic sci-fi reminiscent iteration of Y2K peaked in the late 1999 to early 2000s. The Y2K aesthetic is radically distinctive and inspired by when the internet became more popular during the dot-com boom. This style is typically quite futuristic with a slight retro edge. Think shiny materials, chunky sneakers, pleated skirts, baguette bags, and colorful sunglasses. Though the earliest forms of futurism can actually be found in the 70s. Proper retrofuturism is a concept which is inspired by the imagined future that the past had for the coming millennia. The best example of this aesthetic in media would be the Disney Channel original movie, Zenon. You will often find media from the 60s or 70s that depicts the future as some novel era, from flying cars to flying transport to robot helpers and radio calling. The most common theme was convenience. The people of the past wanted the future to come with an easier life. Though retrofuturism began in the 1900s with the Dome in Italy, the aesthetic was based mostly in white majority culture. However, fashion history often overlooks or underrepresents the influences of Janet Jackson, Missy Elliott, and Black, musical artists who, in part, defined and revolutionized this aesthetic. These artists align with Afrofuturism, a concept dating back to the 70s that projected black space voyagers into a fantastical, avant-garde landscape. Notably, the conceptualization of Jackson's music video for Scream featured shiny metallics, shoulder pads, and other elements of space like Revere that captured Afrofuturism and Y2K fashion. Even oversized gold hoop earrings have their roots in black culture. Hoop earrings originated in Africa and quickly became a core component of Egyptian royalty. In the 60s and 70s, they became associated with African beauty when Nina Simone and Angela Davis began wearing them. In an article for the New York Times, jewelry designer Jamil Mohammed discussed the erasure of black history from popular fashion items, saying black style has to be contextualized differently in order to be seen as luxurious. That's sort of the thing that's always happened with black culture and black fashion. It's always hip when someone else does it, but never when we do it. Thank you for watching this video, and in the comments below, I'd like to hear your thoughts. mcbling or futurism? What's the real Y2K? Again, thank you guys for watching, and have a mocktail cocktail Cosmo to end your day. Good morning, good evening, and good night.